In today's My Hero Academia video we explain why All For One could be Deku's father, who could have stolen Deku's quirk. At the end of this video we even show you an explanation of why the X-ray of Deku's toe from episode 1 might not even be fake to make this theory possible in the first place, but is still not an indication that Deku was born without a quirk. The fact that All For One could be Deku's father will not make Deku a 5th generation quirk user, but a 2nd generation quirk user, so the X-ray is not indicative of whether Deku was born with or without a quirk. You will learn why this is so important at the end of this video. Also, only a small percentage of the people who watch our videos are actually subscribed, so if you end up liking this video, consider subscribing. Please enjoy this video, let's go! The reason we didn't believe in this theory until now was simply because it sounded way too crazy, even though there was clear evidence to support it. But one thing changed, so we started to believe in the possibility of this theory. This is not because we suddenly agree with the logic, because actually we have always seen why this theory could make sense, but rather because due to the fact of how My Hero Academia is developing lately, other theories that we think are much more probable and logical are becoming more and more impossible from a plot point of view, if there will be no My Hero Academia sequel. Let me explain why. The biggest mystery of My Hero Academia is undoubtedly the identity of Deku's father, Hisashi Midoriya. In an interview, Horikoshi, the creator of My Hero Academia, confirmed that Izuku's father will be revealed in the future. And that was 3 years ago. Now that it was recently confirmed that My Hero Academia will most likely end as early as 2022, in about 30-50 chapters, we know that the final story arc will begin very soon, and it will be shorter than we all expected. With this very soon ending of My Hero Academia, there isn't much time or plot opportunities to reveal the identity of Deku's father, except that Deku's father is either dead or All For One. If Deku's father suddenly turned out to be an international hero, it just wouldn't make sense, especially since that's not the reason why he hasn't visited Deku in 16 years. We will talk more about his absence in a moment. And making him a new villain wouldn't make much sense either, because the focus should really be on All For One and not suddenly shift to a new villain, and certainly not Deku's father. So if My Hero Academia ends for good and Deku's father is indeed revealed in the next 50 chapters, then of all the theories only one makes sense, which is that Deku's father is All For One. At the center of this theory is Horikoshi, the author of My Hero Academia, and his love for the Star Wars franchise. There are actually a number of references to Star Wars in My Hero Academia, from city names to concepts to plot points. Even the story structure of My Hero Academia is based on the original trilogy. The main character is trained by someone who is past his prime so that he can then continue to fight against the main villain, while at the same time seeking the additional training of an old and shorter teacher, who was also the master of the main character's mentor. In addition, the main character's mentor had another master, who was also the master of the main villain. Thus a circle of relation was formed between the main protagonist and the main antagonist. Now if we transfer this plot to My Hero Academia, we can see that Izuku became the student of a hero who is no longer able to fight as he used to. The reason for this is that one day Deku is supposed to defeat All For One, the main villain. During his training, Deku also seeks the help of an old and shorter teacher who also trained All Might. All Might had another mentor who was also the grandmother of Shigaraki, who later in the story received All For One and who is to merge with the character All For One and thus become All For One himself. The resemblance is so accurate that it simply cannot be a coincidence. The only thing missing to really complete this relationship in this story is that in Star Wars the main villain is the father of the main hero, which will then mean that All For One could actually be the father of Izuku. How can this possible reference in My Hero Academia be explained? Deku's father, whose name is Hisashi Midoriya, does not appear at all in this story so far. In fact, he was only mentioned once in the first episode when Deku and his mother had an appointment with Dr. Ujiko because of Deku's quirk. We learned that his father has a fire-breathing quirk. We know that his work, whatever that may be, keeps him busy abroad. This is mentioned in the character description of Deku's mother, Inko Midoriya. Therefore, he is not at home. And by not at home, I literally mean never at home. When Deku was born, his father went abroad to do whatever he is doing and has not returned since. What kind of job keeps him so extremely busy that in 16 years he has not been able to come home for even a single day, such as a national holiday, Deku's birthday, or even a single day off to spend time with his family? Inko would have told much more about her husband if he was a professional hero or a very important person that Deku could be proud of, but she didn't, which means that she's definitely hiding something about Hisashi, or doesn't know anything about him herself. His absence is much more extreme than you think. There are no pictures of him in the house, nor does Hisashi try to contact his family. He doesn't write letters, make phone calls, or send gifts, for example for Deku's birthday. If you compare all this with All For One, you can see that the whole point of his character is to steal other people's quirks. With this ability he has stolen hundreds if not thousands of quirks, so it wouldn't be too far-fetched to assume that he also has a fire-breathing quirk, or for example a memory manipulation ability that would allow him to manipulate the memories of Inko Midoriya. But why would someone like All For One have a child in the first place? The most likely possibility of course is to steal his ability. We know that Deku was born without a quirk, but what if he was actually born with a quirk but it was stolen by All For One? Maybe All For One has children with women all over the world to create even more quirks that he can then steal. Basically something like a quirk farm. Because of his impatience to get more quirks, he started impregnating many women while brainwashing them into thinking he was their husband. Once their child was born, he would steal their quirk and get the woman to go to Dr. Ujiko, who would then use a fake X-ray to declare that the children were born without quirks. The X-ray must be faked, because that is the biggest problem with this theory. But I will show you an alternative possibility right at the end of this video. Dr. Ujiko has confirmed that Deku does indeed have a physical feature that shows he was born without a quirk, and that is an extra joint in his toe. But the fact that Dr. Ujiko is the closest ally of All For One actually makes this theory possible. We have to wonder if it is really a coincidence that Dr. Ujiko was introduced so early in this series as the doctor who confirmed that Deku has no quirk. If you look at his body language, it already says that he is a crook who might be able to steal even children's quirk without empathy or morals. That definitely must be a reason why Horikoshi made the same doctor who told Deku he had no quirk the closest ally of All For One. The only possibility we can see is that this doctor is actually helping All For One either steal quirks or cover for him by lying that the children were actually born without quirk. That is why it's so important to this theory that the X-ray shown was a fake. But if All For One is the father of Deku, then this X-ray does not necessarily have to be fake, because there's another way to explain the X-ray showing the extra joint. Namely, the explanation that this extra joint disappeared through human evolution, as humans were suddenly born with quirks. Evolution does not take place from one generation to the next, but over many generations new physical characteristics slowly develop. So it is very likely that almost all quirk users of the first generation still had their extra joint in the little toe, and their children belonging to the second generation would also have this extra joint with a very high probability. With each new generation, the probability of being born with an extra joint in the little toe will become less and less likely, until Deku's generation where it's simply impossible to have a quirk but still be born with the extra joint. For this reason, Dr. Ujiko asked about Inko's generation, as this is relevant to the question of whether Deku's missing joint is important to determining whether Deku was born with or without a quirk. He specifically mentioned that Inko is the 4th generation of quirk users, making Deku the 5th generation, which would give him the perfect excuse to claim that Deku were born without a quirk, since 5th generation quirk users simply cannot have an extra joint on the little toe. However, if Deku were for example the 2nd generation of quirk users, he would most likely still have the extra joint with maybe 80-90% probability and could still have a quirk. So if All For One is really Deku's father, this would make Deku a 2nd generation quirk user, or at least a mix of 1st and 4th generation, which is still far from the genetic characteristics of a 5th generation quirk user. With this possibility, the X-ray shown does not even have to be faked, but Deku's body might simply not be as evolved as the body of a 5th generation user. If the series reveals that Deku was indeed born with a quirk and his X-ray was not faked, it is almost certain that Deku's father can therefore only be All For One. Let me know in the comments what you think. Could All For One be Deku's father? And if not, who do you think is Deku's father? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, and if you are new, feel free to subscribe with the notification bell activated. Thank you. See you next time. Bye.